Welcome to the Infinite Improvisation Podcast, adventures in music and creativity. I am Steve Treseler, and joined as always by my co-host Lauren Best, who's across the border in Canada. Hey, Lauren.
Hey, how are you today?
Good. How are you feeling?
I'm good.
So this is our fifth and final episode in our series on how to improvise, or even more broadly, how to come up with new ideas, new musical ideas, new artistic ideas, and what that process is about. And we've covered experimentation, play, limitations, deep listening, and today we'll get into reflection. These are the 5 creative practices of infinite improvisation. So before we hit record, Lauren, you said you were reflecting on reflection. So what's on your mind when it comes to reflection as a practice?
I've been thinking about how part of reflection is taking time, and how you can't really rush reflection. Like, you can try to rush reflection. I think it's still beneficial to reflect even just a little bit. Like, I think a rushed reflection is sometimes better than no reflection. And I think we can do really bite-sized reflections, or really, there's lots of different approaches to that. But that part of reflection, for me, requires the taking of time and requires ideally a change of setting. For me to really enter a different brain space, and to engage in more, diffuse thinking as opposed to more focused thinking. And regardless of where I'm directing my thoughts or what questions I'm asking myself, that there's kind of these other conditions for reflection that I personally find helpful. and thinking about whether just how we build these into our lives or don't in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're reflecting or doing something that involves more lateral thinking or making different connections, that is something that can be hard to just grind out and rush. And largely, I think of this as a process that is separate from the actual creation process. It's very interrelated, but when we're reflecting, it may not be in the moment that we're creating. And there's a great quote. It's from Sister Corita Kent. It's often attributed to John Cage, who quoted it all the time, but it's Sister Corita Kent's 10 rules for teachers and students, which is: don't try to create and analyze at the same time. They're different processes, which is interesting to think about. And we've talked about kind of when we're in the moment and trying to be focused on what we're creating and letting it be, this kind of reflection when we're reflecting on our work, other types of reflection as well, that, yeah, it is a process that's a little bit, that can be removed from the act of creating something.
Yeah. And to further to that the reflection is not the same as just listening. You know what I mean? Like listening or absorbing, kind of taking in something. Because sometimes oh, I'm not creating, but I'm kind of listening and taking in. For me, that can be a part of reflection, but that a part of reflection is sort of has this internal aspect, and so it's sort of separated from listening.
And the reflection can just be observing our own reactions to things. So we'll be talking about the process of reflection on work we've created, and listening or observing back, but also we can just even reflect on art that really resonates with us, and really meaningful experiences and things that where things were really working, where things weren't, what is meaningful and what's not, and those kind of elements that help more on the strategy side of where are we going next? What project do we want to take on next, or what do we want to eliminate from our pile of projects we have? So there's that type of reflection.
Or even what we want to eliminate from our focus in the moment, right? How we can't necessarily focus on everything at once, or in our listening or our viewing, or our we can sort of try to take in everything at once, right? But oftentimes we're drawing our attention and our reflection more deeply into one thing, which means less into other things.
Yeah, and as we are performing, it's a skill to learn how to channel your focus into the right place at the right time. If we just kind of let our focus go to whatever happens to catch its attention, sometimes thoughts won't always go to the most helpful place in performing. Like, oh, look who just walked in the door, or oh, this went better last time. Like, oh, just having that process of reflection can even help us be like, okay, well, what are the things to focus on during this activity that will give the best results? And one area I wanted to touch on is the idea of reflecting on our own work, especially if we have created something, we have maybe recorded a practice session, or maybe a more formal recording session or performance, and then listening back and reflecting in a way that becomes helpful for the process and not beating ourselves up over it, which we can have a tendency to do, just listening on edge and being like, oh no, I hope I don't mess up. Oh, that sounded bad. Oh, that sounded worse. We can get into that very hypercritical mode of listening or reflecting, which isn't that helpful. So I have a list of actually some reflection questions that can be helpful when listening back or reflecting back on your work. I'll go through a few of these. So this can be right after, if you had a session, you can listen and reflect right after. I like to let some time pass. Like if I have a recording session, I want to listen back to what take of a piece to use. I'll want a couple weeks to pass so I won't remember how I felt about it then, because sometimes my reactions later on can be different. Like, how did you feel before, during, and after the session? When was the music most compelling, and why? Again, these are music focused, but you can adapt them for any other medium. When was the music not effective? Why? What surprised you? And what part of the process was challenging? What patterns emerged? What changes would you make, or what changes would make the music better? And did you discover any material you'd like to explore in the future? How has your artistry improved over time? And what did you learn from the experience? So that's a lot of them to throw out there. But you're very focused on something specific about, like, how have you improved over time, rather than going, oh no, where did I make a mistake, or where was I not perfect? Some of these directing our reflection to our work to the right questions can help us break out of hypercritical mode. Maybe some of our listeners don't experience that, but a lot of people, run into that, or like avoid listening or reflecting because you don't. Sometimes the concert felt like it was really fun, but you don't want to listen back to it because, oh, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought it was, and you can get into that headspace.
And when you mentioned what was challenging about the process, which you also mentioned the idea of waiting a little bit before listening. So I guess ideally you might not remember what was challenging about the process, but when you listen back, it also has a funny way of sometimes like triggering those memories, or like you may then have a different perspective. But I thought to myself, like, what was challenging about the process of listening to it? Or about like kind of approaching it or reflecting upon it? Or even instead of what was challenging, like, how did you feel, or what did you notice in yourself as you were listening? And so, like, what did you notice in your thoughts and the contents of your thoughts?
So you can reflect on the reflection.
Yeah, like, what did you notice in your thoughts? What did you notice in kind of the maybe like feelings that may not have had like specific thoughts associated, but also like, did you feel that anywhere in your body? Like, often I will have like really physical sensations when I'm feeling especially if I'm feeling critical of myself listening back to something. Wow. And then you can reflect on that process. It's like that Dr. Seuss book with the bee watcher, whole line of them. But well, it's really true. Like, you can play back the same short clip, and you can kind of like separate out the different like intake channels that you have, right? So like, what do you just see, even if you like turn off the audio, but with audio on is helpful in a different way. Like, what are your eyes taking in, trying to like really focus on that information and like separating that from what your ears are taking in, for example.
Absolutely. And I was noticing sometimes when I was listening back to a recording of myself and I was getting into critical mode, I was like at my computer and kind of tense and listening and kind of scanning for like defensively listening, which isn't good. But then I was realizing when I actually listen to music for enjoyment, I'm usually like taking a walk or driving. So I started listening back to recordings while taking a walk, and suddenly I could just feel the flow of the music better, and it got me out of just being like sedentary and tense and just take a walk and listen. And that's how I was reviewing mixes from some of my records. I couldn't hear everything, as like when I was listening even through decent headphones, taking a walk. It's not the best way to maybe hear the quality of the mix, but I could hear it just allowed me to hear the music better. So knowing the right space for listening and reflecting can be helpful too. And for me, it's often outside.
I like that. I love taking things outside, you know. You know that. What are your thoughts on like having another person present while you're reflecting? Maybe not even the first time, but like kind of like adding the layer of another observer or another reflector. And I say that both in terms of like one, getting someone else's feedback obviously is one sense of it, but even aside from the content of their feedback or their opinion, right? Just like having someone where it's more of a dialogue, and also just like being seen, right? Like even that if that person doesn't give any opinion, I find it's sometimes a different experience kind of having like that degree of visibility. Even if it's just only one other person, it often feels a bit different. And I find sometimes for myself it can be like really challenging in those moments, depending on the person and depending on the nature of what I'm sharing, and that's felt different at different times in my life. But sometimes it can be helpful, so like we kind of stick with it and to kind of like witness that. What do you think?
Absolutely. It does feel different when someone's there, just like if you're playing music by yourself or performing for one person. The dynamic and the feel of it can be different. And I don't do that often enough. Often it might be with like people I'm collaborating with. We recorded, hey, let's listen back to that take, and often still in the studio. But I can't think of a time where I've brought someone else into that process. What would that be like? That would be an interesting thing to experiment with, for sure. But it does one thing that came up is when I did that project, one of my projects with Ingrid Jensen, Invisible Sounds. We were filmed by this whole NPR crew and did an interview and a live performance at the Royal Room for Jazz Night in America, and it was a big deal. And I was self-conscious about it, but I hadn't seen the video. There was like a live premiere, and I was supposed to be there in the chat, so I was seeing it for the first time. I had heard some of the recording, and I was kind of in defensive, like listening, but I was supposed to be there monitoring the chat. But then I was getting like so many good vibes from people and messages from people all over the world. And Ingrid was there and we're talking, and it was like, it ended up feeling, it was a much better way to consume it, because there were, it was very public. So it wouldn't be like, oh, that didn't work. Let me bury that and record it again. It's like, no, it's done. It's already there. It's already produced. And it was a very public way of doing that. And it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it can be very intense that way when you're having like your own reactions, which may seem like counter to or like contrary to feedback even, or hopefully it's in the same vein, but it's like kind of making space for both and kind of honoring other people's experiences who are like having their own relationship with that music right away, as opposed to like it totally being centered on your own experience because you're editing it or you're gatekeeping it, and it's like you kind of become this like black hole of creator and destroyer, right? Like it's like it's all about only your thoughts about that piece. Like once it's out there even more broadly, it's a very different feeling, right? Because other people are developing their lown relationship to that.
And there's this art to being detached about it. It's always something I'm working on myself, that we're detached. This is very, for lots of us, we're devoting our lives, or a good chunk of our lives, to this pursuit. But at the same time, it's helpful to just like observe and detach and listen. And then if something's not working, just kind of being in problem solving mode. It's like, oh, well, what can I change to make this better? Rather than like, oh, that sucks and I'm terrible. And the downward spiral of negativity bias, right? Where our brains are just drawn toward threats. It's what kept our ancestors alive. We've talked about this before, scanning for threats and avoiding them. But then when we do that, when we're listening to a playback of a mix, which rationally doesn't make any sense, but it still feels like we're being judged. So some of those questions, I don't remember if this was on the bonus episode or not, but I got this from the Bulletproof Musician, the performance psychology class. It's some questions to ask about the process that help combat negativity bias, and they're built into some of those reflection questions. Oh, and those questions, by the way, they are in the forthcoming Infinite Improvisation handbook. So if you sign up for our mailing list at infiniteimprovisation.com, that will come to you as soon as it's ready. It'll come to you for free. And so back to those questions are to combat the negativity bias. And I do this with students all the time. They go, oh, how'd your performance go? And they're like, I came in early in one spot, or I had one squeak. And then that colors their whole perception of it. And yeah, sometimes if something didn't go how you wanted, you'll want to correct that. But if it actually does a disservice to the music when all you remember is the one negative thing. So the questions are, what is something that went really well? And what is something that has improved? And what is something that took lots of effort? So I've been doing this with my wife, Kate, has been creates a lot of arts and crafts. She knits and does fiber art and stained glass and all of this. And if she's worried about a collection of something or getting in her head, she doesn't always love it. But then like, no, I ask these same questions too, to kind of help breaking out of the negativity bias. And then you start to track. It's like, what's going well? What's took effort and what's improving? Then you're kind of mapping the progress and not just mapping the blemish or what didn't work.
Go ahead.
Just think where our attention, where your brain is naturally drawn to, if you don't direct the focus, if you just let it go somewhere, sometimes it goes somewhere not helpful, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and sometimes too, we can have a lot of sort of superficial conversations about a performance or an achievement, and not that that's fundamentally a bad thing or whatever, but like there's often like, oh, how did it go? Oh, that's so great. Oh, you must be so happy. Or like, oh, your parents are so proud. Wow, it's so amazing. Or like whatever, right? You
do that voice so well.
Or I mean, even if it's, don't get me wrong, like positive feedback is good, but even if it's only on the level of like, oh, how did it go? Great. Like it's like that's like such a small slice of an experience, that like we're hopefully trying to have more nuance about, but it's just not always the time or place to have that more nuanced discussion, right? Like someone who's just asking you how something went, like they don't always like it's not always the moment where they even like understand the things you're reflecting upon that you want to improve. So I think like creating that space in our brains, I think also helps us like appreciate the positive feedback more, because like we have this balance of like having time to reflect upon it as well in a way that's like more like authentic to us maybe, or more like not just more authentic to us, that like speaks to a greater range of our experience and what's important to us.
Yeah, when you get that, oh, how did the concert go? It's very nice. It's an equivalent of, how's it going? That kind of question, where you're not probably going to peel back all the layers in that moment. Maybe you'll get there, but... And yeah, when we bring other people in, that could be another topic for conversation, is about when to take feedback and who to take constructive feedback from. And we can get caught up that that's something. Whereas if we post this podcast and then suddenly we take to heart any negative comment that shows up online and someone's trolling us, and then do we reformat the podcast to take in that feedback from the comment section? Well, of course not. That's silly. But and some people know what they like, but not why they like it, or they might not be the right kind of audience for what you're bringing. So it's like if you want to bring someone into that reflection experience and get constructive and helpful feedback from people, who are the right folks to take it from? Because I would argue it's not, you don't want to, you want to curate who you take feedback from. If a random person after a show goes, oh, can I give you a piece of advice? You're like, no, thanks. Not that I'm in denial, but you're not on my list of people who I need your feedback right now, and it might not be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we think of even just our own perspective and our own feedback, depending on what lens we're looking at something, we can have really different opinions of it, right? Depending on kind of the angle we're looking at it, or even like the day or how we're feeling, but also like just the way in which we're considering it. And likewise, everyone that we talk to is going to have like a variability in like how they might consider something, depending on like kind of the angle they're thinking about it in the day. But then like beyond that, like not everyone loves the same flavor of ice cream, like you're not going to be everyone's favorite flavor of ice cream. So it's like ice cream, right? Like if you take the same ice cream sample, which will be melted by now. I should have picked a different food. But you know what I mean? To like a bunch of different people, like you're going to get different opinions on it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like the ice cream you've chosen is like it is all those things to all those different people. Some people like it, some people don't. Like some people will have, you know, say certain things about it, but like you know, you got to decide what you think about the ice cream.
Yeah, and yeah, knowing who the audience is, it is probably not going to be for everyone. What you're creating isn't going to be like the Tide laundry detergent of music. Same thing with our, you know, using the podcast as an example. If we played this for someone who only likes listening to sports talk on podcasts, like, you know, they're probably not going to like this podcast. But that, you know, how meaningful is that feedback? It's not the right, you know, it's not the audience that we're choosing for it.
And I still encourage. Like I think it's still valuable to get feedback from people whose what I was gonna say is from people who don't know what they're talking about and whose opinions you don't value as highly as others. But just because like sometimes you're gonna get feedback like that, right? Like someone's going to comment on pistachio ice cream who like has never tasted it before and they don't particularly like it, whereas you're making pistachio ice cream for the pistachio ice cream lovers, you know? And like, I don't know. I think for me, like sometimes it's very frustrating and discouraging at the time to get that kind of feedback, but I find it helps me take all feedback in like with a grain of salt or with a greater sense of perspective.
Yeah, and you can learn something from that, but also being able to curate it, or you might take it all in if you're reading a bunch of comments section is a good place to mention it. So some people know that they take it to heart. I know some people that they might read it and really take everything personally, and they know that, in which case it can be good to just block it out and only seek out the feedback that's going to be most helpful. But otherwise, yeah, you can take in all of it, but you have to have the discernment to know what's like, oh, that is a good constructive idea that we can take to make our work better in the future versus what's noise.
Yeah, totally. And it's like, you know, it's kind of like things that are challenging versus things that in a good way and maybe stretching or strengthening versus things that just wear you down.
Totally. But in the reflection side, I also like thinking about reflecting on other models too. You don't have to get, not just getting too stuck in, you know, listening and observing your own things, but having these really clear models of music or art that's like really deeply resonates with you, and then have the reflection to feel like, why is it? What is it specifically? Like, what is it, the elements of this? Is it the lyrics? Is it the timbre? Is it the quality? Is it the technical execution? Or like, what is it specifically about something that's really meaningful? And what, even reflecting on those elements. And I even have like notebooks filled with that, just even some different musical elements. Like here's some different rhythmic components of music that really gel with me. And then here's timbre and form and instrumentation, like all these things that have been sort of the sketches for other music I'm working on. So really reflecting on it. It's like, what's really meaningful and why? Or how about something else that, you know, the craft is really amazing, but it's not your thing. It just doesn't do it for you. Like, why? You reflect on what is it about it that is meaningful for you and what is not. And from your own body of work, of stuff that you've done, I've reflected too, I've recorded certain things that are still meaningful to me to listen to, and other things that may have gotten a better review, but I listen back and, you know, it doesn't do as much for me. So that can be quite insightful, again, for the strategy or the direction. It's like, well, what am I doing next? And those kind of questions of knowing what the models are and where you're headed. That can be really enlightening.
Noticing, like, as you're saying, like the push-pull, and I think that, like, whether that's like old pieces of work, but like I think that push-pull kind of, or like it can be a why, like, why is it that I like this or I don't like this, you know? But it can also just be like, oh, I'll just notice like the moments within the piece that I feel like I want more, like I'm drawn to it, it's sticky or it's yummy or like I want that, versus like moments that I feel like I'm pulling away or like I'm not as interested or I'm feeling like I'm shutting down, or like, you know, you can think of it in other ways instead of like a push-pull. You could think of, well, I mean, there may be things that already suggest like tension or resolution, but like kind of other opposites as well. Both the whys, but also the whys too. I'm a fan of thinking of like teasing it out, but kind of also just like sort of noticing and like increasing the amount of noticing as well, without conclusions.
Yeah, and that you mentioned that reminds me of, it was a composition exercise, and I heard the secondhand. So any of you folks, you can let me know if I get this wrong. I believe it came from the late Lee Hilo, who's a composition professor at the school I went to. And he asked, one of the first things you do in lessons or in a class was find like your favorite moment in a piece of music, like just that transcendent moment where you talk about everything lines up. And then you go back and deeply analyze the 30 seconds leading up to that, like in every possible way that you can do some musical analysis and figure out what is it about that will, how does it set up that moment? What you were talking about, that tension and release. Is it those moments that are amazing? Is it that moment itself, or is it the context, or how it's how it leads into that? And yeah, and I know at a time, I think it was about that time when I was at music school, time just working a lot on the craft of the music and worried about virtuosity and people who were, playing higher and faster. Anyway, then there was time I was starting to kind of go back and listening to pop music and songwriters, and I found that there was certain music or certain like timbres of people's voice where I'd hear it and it would just suck me all the way in. I was like, wow, I'm just like addicted to some of these sounds. And I'm like, well, there's nothing that, and I remember things like, well, this isn't virtuosic or impressive or the best, but it's just super amazing. Like, why is it? Why am I drawn to this? Like, what is the aesthetic or the other values of this music, which is different from what we've been in music school nerd land, just diving into all the mechanics and practicing and all of that. But that's that type of reflection can be super helpful in the journey.
Cool. Yeah, and that like reflection, I'm just thinking about the relationship between memory and reflection. And well, one, just the point that reflecting helps us remember things better. So even if you're not gaining like insight from reflection, it's still making whatever you did more, I was going to say more worthwhile, but what I mean by that is it's taking whatever you did and kind of strengthening the neural pathways, the networks in your mind, so that like the time you spent doing that, you're kind of getting a more lasting effect from. And so even if the reflection isn't like, oh, I'm having all these deep insights, like, or like I realized something, or like it's, it doesn't necessarily even have to be something novel. Reflection kind of as review, so to speak, like without consciously adding on a lot of things, is like also is valuable, and will, I think, help your subconscious work at those things too. But just on the level that like we will remember the experience more, particularly when we reflect kind of very shortly afterwards, and then again after that. Yeah,
then it's more likely to get into long-term storage, the experience, rather than a fleeting moment that just goes away.
Yeah. Oh, and so regarding that, is that like kind of, that's another variable we can adjust with like how we're reflecting, is like reflecting upon something only with our memory of it, right? Versus like reflecting and then listening back to something you haven't heard and then reflecting again. And also even within the listening process, like how much we listen to and how much we can actually remember and keep in our minds and respond to. Like in a conversation, right? Like if I say one sentence and then ask you to respond, you remember what I said in a certain way, and you remember probably, if it's a short enough sentence, you might remember almost word for word what I said, right? Yeah. And really be able to keep everything in the front of your mind that I was talking about, and even keep my energy and intonation and kind of the feeling I had kind of really present with you. Whereas if I do what I'm doing right now and say a whole bunch of things that has like there's a lot going on, and there's like kind of like I'm going through different kind of energies within it, even, right? That's a lot more to reflect upon, like, and you're going to have a different memory of what I'm doing and a different kind of reflective experience that way.
And that would be hard. That would be a hard few paragraphs to repeat back. But thankfully we're recording, so
yeah.
We can then we're going to get a transcript of it, so we can then we can go back and
then we can truly reflect.
Yeah.
But I often like mention this to students of mine. I'll be like, don't play for 5 minutes and then listen back and try to analyze it. Like try like 30 seconds or 5 seconds. Like start with really short clips so that like you can actually remember what you did and like really listen to what you did, because if you sit through 5 minutes of yourself and then you're trying to reflect on that, that's a huge amount of information.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I was thinking about too is, how do you think that the practice of reflection fits into the category of these are our how episodes? You know, how do we do this? How do we improvise? How do you see that the reflection piece fits into the how? That makes.
I think this is important actually, because I was mentioning before like that reflection, like time helps some reflection, which it's, I guess that's like before I was saying, oh, reflect quickly, and like there is something to be said for that too. But that like having some time, having some diffuse thinking, sleeping, like all of those things are helpful. And I think that we don't always build reflection into our, well, I mean, I hope we build reflection into our creative processes, but like I'm thinking like there's the creative process, but even like the project cycle or like a class, right? Like often, I mean, again, like some classes do have time for reflection, right? Like let's talk about it, let's reflect upon it, or even like time to like write some notes. But like some experiences don't build in reflective moments or don't build in time for that, or you know, and so on and so forth. So I think like we can choose to reflect, and I think we're reflecting anyways, but we can choose to reflect, and we can create opportunities for reflection by design. And I think it's important to remember that it's a part of it.
Yeah, and I think, well, as I mentioned before, it does help with that, you know, to take the moment and to figure out the strategy, the next project, or what, you know, answer the question, what do I do next? That reflection helps, and also in the process of trying to level up the skills that are important to improve over time. One thing that just came to mind, listening back, was I think it was my first studio session after I, you know, finished school, and I was back teaching, was starting to work professionally in Seattle, and I was recording a demo for a friend's band that I was playing it. And I hadn't really been in a recording studio before, and I hadn't been listening back. I hadn't been doing a lot of reflection. I was kind of that avoiding listening back, as I was talking about. And then, you know, we're in the studio, and I remember the engineer is like, did he say something? Is there a reason the saxophone sounds so throaty? I was like, what's that supposed to mean? And we're like, listen, and I listened back to it, and I was just like so embarrassed. I like hated everything about how it sounded. You know, I had like a little, you know, mini or full on, you know, artistic crisis. Why am I sounding like this? But it did lead the way to like starting to record myself. Like, why do I sound, once I got out of feeling sorry for myself, I just didn't like how I was playing, what I was playing, and I was not very kind to myself about it. But eventually it led to, heck, even like an equipment overhaul. I ended up like changing all my equipment, dumping my mouthpiece, new saxophone. I mean, I just changed my whole equipment and this and concept of sound and practicing recording. And then by the time I got to actually record my first record, I'd done enough of it. I knew how to shape my sound in a way that I would like how it recorded. And I listened back to the first mix of my first record even. I was like, okay, that's the sound. And I was like happy with how it sounded. But it took that process of, I kind of have to know what's there and not be in denial about it, reflect. And it was like kind of some painful growth. But I could have just, you know, blinders and just kept charging ahead without taking that more thoughtful, reflective moment to like learn how to be better at, in this case, recording saxophone in a little room.
Totally. Like, we're asking ourselves to notice things so that we can change them. And then sometimes we're so mad that we discover things that we want to change, you know? And it's like, you know, sometimes I have an outfit in mind and I put it on and I look in the mirror and I'm like, oh no, like, it did not come together the way I imagined, right? And I look in the mirror and I need to make some changes. And sometimes I have to go through that process several times. But I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that like those clothes should be burned, although maybe sometimes like it's time to give some things away. But it might just be like that I need to adjust other things, right? Or sometimes like I'm just too hot. I just don't like how it feels. I didn't account for that. I didn't notice that before. You know, sometimes I don't have to do a lot to my hair, and I usually won't anyways, but sometimes it's like really humid and things are different, right? And it's like, just because you look in the mirror and you want to change something doesn't mean that like it's the mirror's fault or your fault or that like all is, you know, lost. It just means that like you're getting ready and you're preparing and like you're making adjustments because that's part of it. That's what you want to do.
Yeah, and back to episode 1 of Experimentation. You have a hypothesis about what outfit's going to work, and then you gather some data. You're like, maybe not.
Totally, yeah. And
then
I was
make
going
the
to say
change.
Very closely related to experimentation, because like that reflection so has to be a part of it. And I find also like it's not always the reflection doesn't always like come when you're expecting it or like help you in the ways you're expecting. Like sometimes we get some surprises through it, and whether that's like, as you were saying, sometimes something that's like really difficult like down the line can turn out to be like part of you know, a process that's really useful. Or sometimes we just use the information in different ways.
One other, I guess, kind of concept I wanted to get to as we wrapped up is sort of this paradox, or is in the book by George Leonard Mastery, so the Master's Paradox. It's kind of this paradox between there being goals and also no goals. I mean, partly, one part of the process when we're kind of separating creating versus analyzing, that I remember this it's a principle from this program, like a work community, like music workshop program called Music for People. And one of their principles, what it's called, is, you know, all sounds exist in the universe with all others. You know, there are no mistakes. You make a sound and it is what it is, and we're accepting of that and observing it. And it's just a beautiful way of going about and creating things. Like we can embrace that. And a lot of what we're doing, it's the act of creating and being with other people. And that just is what it is. We're observing it, kind of that there's not a goal. It's just the doing it. But on the same time, we have those things where we do have projects we want to complete, or we're trying to level up our skills, that we do have, at the same time, we do have goals and benchmarks and things that we're striving for, that we're growing, that we're not stagnating. And one way that he talks about this in the book, the quote is, "The trick here is to walk the fine line between endless, goalless practice and those alluring goals that appear along the way. But the journey is what counts." Which is interesting. So kind of being able to hold both of those. It's, you know, I want to get better at this skill. I want to finish this project, desired, or, you know, whatever other kind of goals or things you're striving for. And sometimes you don't reach them in a certain way, and that's all part of the journey. But then also kind of accepting all the sounds, you know, everything that's part of the process. The misfires or mistake, or is it even a mistake? But I kind of like that model of holding both of those, because they're both important. Because if I get into the mode where I'm very highly goal oriented, even if I achieve the goal, at a certain point I realize it can still feel kind of empty if the process isn't part of it as well. But I can also feel that I can get you know, if I'm just in the moment and being you know, open to everything, then I can tend to be more complacent, or I'm not sure. It's but I just like just accepting that it's a paradox, and sometimes I have to lean into one side more than the other. Yeah,
and like it's related to like the increasing self-awareness, changing self-awareness, looking at self-awareness, like at yourself and your practice from different angles, and like kind of increasing your capacity for that. And then also the like turning off the self-monitor. And it's like, well, which do I do? Do I pay attention to myself even more so that I can notice these things, so that I can reflect on these things, so I play more slowly and I am more aware and more mindful? Or do I, you know, try to go the direction of having less self-monitor and not being critical and like these other things? And it's, as you're saying, it's a bit of both and in different situations for different reasons. Or some people refer, like I've seen before, it talked about that, like creativity is like finding the balance between absolute narcissism and crippling self-doubt, and then if you strike a line like perfectly down the middle, then you can make things.
Yeah, that's fun. I was and I've heard similar things referenced as like internet bandwidth, like your upload and download. Like I can't be uploading all of these videos and downloading movies at the same time. My internet connection won't handle it. So you've got some upload and download. So I may have referenced this before in terms of when you're creating, even we're having a conversation or making music together, you're listening and being receptive to what you're hearing, and then also thinking about what you're going to say or what you're going to play next. So you're uploading material and you're downloading it, but you can't do all of it at once. So where do you take... You know, how much do you focus on? And oftentimes I'm finding I need to be downloading a lot more than I'm uploading through the saxophone and getting myself more in that. But if I'm totally listening and being very receptive and only listening, then if I go too far that way and I'm not in the moment of what that I need, then I stop contributing. I become passive. So it's an interesting way.
It's related to flow states too. Like anything that's likely to produce a flow state, if you miss the flow state, it's going to be frustrating or boring, right?
Yeah.
Like if you, so it's like things that have the potential to put us in like incredible flow states also have the potential to be so difficult that they're incredibly frustrating and discouraging, right? So it's like it's a trade-off. You know, we're not ever going to constantly be in a flow state for the rest of our lives, but like we can work with the conditions that take us in and out of that.
And that has its own cycle too. That's an upcoming episode we should do on flow states. But I've heard somewhere it totally splits the mark between boredom and anxiety. And if you're like exactly in the middle, then you're in a flow state or being in the zone and supremely focused. But let's. I think we'll leave that for another day.
For another day, another episode.
Yeah. And anything else you were dying to say on this that we didn't get to before we wrap it up?
Well, I'll have to reflect on it more. And maybe our listeners have some reflections of their own to share about this.
Yeah. So connect with us at infiniteimprovisation.com/podcast. And you can join our online community. You can also shoot us an email. And be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And we're up on YouTube as well, so you can watch us have these conversations if you like. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Infinite Improvisation.
Until next time.